A breakthrough has been reached in Gambia college crisis as teachers sit down strike and students plan demonstration called off.
We'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it will be a very bad mistake.
US President Donald Trump warned Iran, saying we'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it would be a very bad mistake that will suffer greatly. United Nations aid agencies expressed concern over the deteriorating situation in Tripoli, stressing more is needed to protect all non-combatants. These are the headlines. More coming on your way on the World Today on iAfrica TV.
Hello viewers, you are watching the World Today News Bulletin. Let's now kick off with our first story. Lecturers of the Gambia College have ended their sit-down strike after meeting with authorities to discuss their demands. The strike has been going on for more than 1 week now. The reason for the strike by the lecturers was, amongst others, for their deplorable working condition at the college to be improved. In the same vein, the planned demonstration by students of the college has also been called off after meeting with the Ministry of Higher Education. Al-Hassan Sise gives us more on that.
The ongoing sit-down strike of lecturers of the Gambia College gets to a halt after a lengthy negotiation with authorities. Lecturers, college administration, chairman of the College Council, permanent secretary, and the Minister of Higher Education embarked on a day-long discussion on the issues affecting students and lecturers of the Gambia College. However, the authorities promised to address the issue of salary delay, saying that their service will be transferred to Gambia Teachers Union Corporation Credit Union to avoid problems. Lecturers were also promised 25% increment. On the side of the students, the minister made several promises after visiting the student union office, among which includes complete renovation of the dormitories by July, provision of support for students in the construction of the student union complex, maintenance of photocopying machines, financial support for students that would want to embark on researches, provision of wireless connection, of which about 1,000 students will be able to connect. Based on the highlighted promises, the lecturers have called off their strike, and the student union body has also called off their proposed demonstration. The Gambia College lecturers for the past 2 weeks ceased to enter classrooms to give lectures to students with demands of 50% salary increment and end to delay payment of salaries. Reporting for iAfrica TV, I am Al-Hassan Sise.
Lectures to resume today at the Gambia College after 2 weeks of a sit-down strike by lecturers. US President Donald Trump warned Iran following mysterious attacks on 4 oil tankers in a strategic waterway. We'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it would be a very bad mistake. They will suffer greatly, Trump said, hosting Hungarian Prime Minister at the White House.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have with us the Prime Minister of Hungary. We'll be discussing trade, very much so, and lots of other subjects. We'll be meeting with representatives of Hungary later on with the Prime Minister, and we'll spend some very good time together. So, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for being at the White House. Thank you very much. It's a great honor. Thanks. We'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it will be a very bad mistake. If they do anything, I'm hearing little stories about Iran. If they do anything, they will suffer greatly. We'll see what happens with Iran.
Mr. President, are you concerned about the attacks on oil tankers in the Middle East?
We'll see what happens. It's going to be a bad problem for Iran if something happens, I can tell you that. They're not going to be happy. They are not going to be happy people. Okay? You can figure it out yourself. They know what I mean by it.
Russia does not support any sides in the US-China trade war, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Since January 2018, China and the United States have been engaged in a trade war involving the mutual placement of tariffs. US President Donald Trump had declared in his campaign to fix China's long-time abuse of the broken international system and unfair practices. The economic disputes occurred before China's entry to the World Trade Organization, but all former US presidents failed to solve the problem. Any sides in the US-China trade war, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Washington and Beijing may be waging these trade wars, but this is not our war. Russia is interested in building independent relations with both China and the United States, Peskov told reporters in Sochi and said Russian-US relations are incommensurably worse than Russian-Chinese. He tried to distance Moscow from the possible effects of this spat between the two biggest world economies. The trade war between the US and China cannot but have consequences for the global economic climate. Of course, it is rather the consequence of a minus sign than a plus sign, he said. At the same time, we should not exaggerate such consequences for our country. After all, our economy is now developing quite steadily in terms of basic parameters. Washington and Beijing are engaged in a trade war since US President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on imported steel and aluminum from China in 2018. Last week, Trump put pressure on Beijing by raising tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese imports after he claimed China was renegotiating a trade deal. And he threatened tariffs on another $325 billion from goods from China. In a tit-for-tat move, China imposed tariffs on $60 billion of American imports Monday. Dmitry Peskov there clearing out Russia's stance on US-China trade war. The European Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini has reiterated the bloc's support for the Iran nuclear deal and sought full implementation of the action plan. As US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in Brussels on an unscheduled visit, the EU official said the 28-nation European grouping stands by the full implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action agreed by the world powers in 2015.
European Union side, on the member states of the European Union side, there's full determination to do all we can, as I said, with all our instruments to implement at full our part of the nuclear agreement, as long as Iran remains compliant with their part, which is the nuclear commitments they've taken. And that, I insist, so far the IAEA has certified they have complied with. And I want to stress this because I believe it's important. We reaffirm today with the 28 foreign ministers of the European Union member states that the IAEA remains the only body entitled to verify that Iran is or is not compliant with its nuclear commitments. We call urgently on Turkey to show restraint, respect the sovereign rights of Cyprus in its exclusive economic zone.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meets Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Sochi, Russia. Mike Pompeo and Sergei Lavrov agreed to work to normalize trade relations and restore bilateral channels of communication following talks at the Black Sea resort of Sochi. Although Pompeo and Lavrov discussed a wide range of bilateral and international problems, including the situation in Iran, North Korea, Ukraine, Syria, and Venezuela, they didn't have major breakthroughs on any of those issues.
Mr. Secretary of State, colleagues, we're happy to welcome you to Sochi. I hope that we'll be able to come up with specific ways how to get US-Russian relations out of that regrettable state that they happen to be due to several objective and subjective reasons as well, considering that this is the task, the instructions coming from our presidents that was confirmed in Helsinki summit as well as in their conversation on the 3rd of May. We have multiple issues that require both urgent methods as well as long-term sustainable solutions. We see that there are certain suspicions and prejudice on both sides, but this is not a way to have a win-win situation, because that mistrust that we have hinders both your security and our security and causes concern around the globe. An important prerequisite for success of our dialogue is to rebuild trust at all levels of our dialogue, including the highest level and the working level as well, ranging from that. And considering that we have met over the past 2 weeks for 2 times, that's a reason for some optimism.
Sergey, thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it. It's great to see you again, twice in a couple of weeks. I'm excited about that. And I know we'll see you too. I'm likely at the G20 we'll have many more opportunities for a conversation. I'm here today because President Trump is committed to improving this relationship. As I think you said, we have differences. Each country will protect its own interests, look out for its own interests of its people. But it's not destined that we're adversaries on every issue. And I hope that we can find places where we have a set of overlapping interests and can truly begin to build out strong relationships, at least in those on those particular issues. I've seen it myself. We've worked closely with you on counterterrorism during my time in service in the executive branch, very successfully. We've saved American lives, we've saved Russian lives as a result of that good, honest, sincere work together. And I think on issues such as arms control and nuclear proliferation, we talked about some of the regional conflicts and terrorism. I think there are spaces where we can get our teams and begin to build out a common set of understandings. I hope, too, that we can begin to build out our strategic security dialogue, as you and I spoke about when we were in Finland a couple of weeks back. And I hope this good faith effort on the part of each of our two nations, as directed by President Trump and President Putin, will stabilize the relationship and put it back on a trajectory that I think would be good for not only each of our two countries and each of our peoples, but for the world as well. I know we'll have frank discussions. I'm sure there'll be places we just can't find common ground, but I look forward to our time together today.
Coming up after the break, United Nations has strongly condemned the attack on a Catholic church in a central Burkina Faso that left 6 people dead. Welcome back. You are watching the World Today News Bulletin. We now take a look at the remaining stories. United Nations has strongly condemned the attack on a Catholic church in central Burkina Faso that left 6 dead, a UN spokesperson Farhan Haq read in a statement. According to reports, gunmen stormed a Catholic church in Dablo in central north of Burkina Faso, killing 6 men including a priest while serving the mass. The attackers then burned the church.
The Secretary General strongly condemned the attack yesterday on a Catholic church during Mass in the village of Dablo in the center-north region of Burkina Faso. He expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a speedy recovery to the injured. He recalls the sanctity of all places of worship and hopes the perpetrators can be swiftly brought to justice. The Secretary General conveys the solidarity of the United Nations to the government and people of Burkina Faso in this difficult moment for the nation. He urges all citizens of Burkina Faso to stand firmly with one another across communities and not to succumb to efforts to sow discord and breed further violence. The UN stands ready to assist in any way it can.
Protesters blocked main roads in Khartoum one day after some people were killed near a main protest camp in the capital. Demonstrators also set fire to tires, bringing traffic to a standstill. 4 Sudanese protesters and an army major were shot dead in the capital hours after protest leaders and the ruling generals reached a breakthrough agreement on transitional authorities to run the country. The latest development came as the Prosecutor General's office said ousted President Omar al-Bashir had been charged over the killings of protesters during anti-regime demonstrations that led to the end of his rule last month. More on this report. Protesters blocked main roads in Khartoum one day after 6 people were killed near a main protest camp in the capital. Demonstrators also set fire to tires, bringing traffic to a standstill. The escalation came hours after the death as unidentified gunmen opened fire at the protest camp near military headquarters. The Sudanese Professionals Association SPA, which spearheaded the protest, called on demonstrators to converge on the sit-in. Sudan's ruling Military Transitional Council said it has reached an agreement with the opposition Freedom and Change Alliance on the structures of governance and transitional authority. The Central Committee of Sudanese doctors said after the attack that 2 unidentified bodies were found in the Nile River, noting the group is working to verify whether the victims were protesters participating in the sit-in. The committee also announced the number of protesters wounded in the attack exceeded 200, including 77 by gunfire, and more than 10 were seriously wounded. The Declaration of Freedom and Change (DFC), an alliance of opposition groups, hinted at the involvement of the army-affiliated Rapid Support Forces in the attack. The forces who shot at the protesters are wearing the uniforms of Rapid Support Forces, said DFC spokesman Khalid Omar. The cars were affiliated with the Rapid Support Forces and carry their motto, and the military council must assume its responsibility for the incident, he added. Last month, the military deposed a long-serving President Omar al-Bashir following months of protests against his 30-year rule. United Nations aid agencies expressed their concern over the dramatically deteriorating humanitarian situation in Tripoli and stressed that more needed to be done to protect all non-combatants caught up in the battle for the Libyan capital as victim numbers rise and thousands flee their homes. Speaking to reporters in Geneva, Safa Mesli, spokesperson for the International Organization for Migration Libya, said as it stands, the clashes are definitely intensifying and we have not noticed a lot of differences since the beginning of armed conflict of 4th April.
As it stands, the clashes are definitely intensifying, and we have not noticed a lot of differences since the beginning of the armed conflict on 4th of April. The total number of people who have been returned since the clashes to Libyan port is 871. IOM Libya and IOM does not consider Libya as a safe port. And there's much needed increase in search and rescue capacity in the Mediterranean, as events of Friday show.
Echoing that concern and with no humanitarian ceasefire in place, UN refugee spokesperson Charlie Yaxley noted that staff reported seeing thousands of civilians moving on a daily basis to safer locations in cities along the coast and towards the Nafusa Mountains. The situation is especially alarming for over 3,300 migrants detainees, among them children and pregnant women, who are receiving help in 11 detention centers from the UN and its partners.
Our teams report seeing thousands of civilians moving on a daily basis to safer locations in cities along the coast and towards the Nafusa Mountains. UNHCR is in a race against time to evacuate people out of these detention centres as quickly as possible, and we urge the international community to come forward with offers of evacuation, humanitarian corridors, or whatever it takes to get people out of harm's way. The UNHCR has repeatedly called that at this time nobody should be returned to Libya, that there are no safe ports there, and we cannot consider this to be a rescue if people are being returned to dire conditions inside Tripoli detention centres.
Thousands of people are migrating from Libya to find safer places. Well, viewers, that's all we have for you on the World Today News Bulletin. For more on these and other stories, kindly log on to our website, iafrica.tv. I am Fatma Tajaju. Bye for now.